Hello you wonderful YouTubers, welcome to my channel. I'm afraid the weather is much too bad for me to be taking out my bike, so I'm using some recent footage on the way back to Gosport from Loomies. Now I may be a bearer of good news or bad news, it depends on your preference. But after a long think about this, and due to me having lots to do in the time I have every day, I decided that I will still be doing either a local history or a bike history in each blog, but not both. I'm not going to stop doing them, but only one or the other in each post. So on that note, this week I'm going to give you the history of the Humber Motorbike Company. Next week though, which I'm quite excited about, I'll give you a special look at one of Portsmouth's long-lived landmarks. I'm going to keep it under my hat for the moment, but a little hint, it's on Albert Road. I have permission to meet up with the archivist who will be giving me a guided tour, and then I will put together what I hope will be a special local history slot next week. So without further ado, let's have a bit of motorbike exhaust before we get to the bike history. Motorbike companies, Humber Limited started life as a bicycle manufacturer and then became a pioneering British motorcycle manufacturer. They produced the first practical motorbike made in Britain by fitting one of their Humber bicycles with an E.J. Pennington 2 horsepower motor in 1896. On the 10th of July 1899, Bert Yates won a motorcycle race on his Humber motorcycle in Coventry in what he claimed was the first motorcycle race ever held on a track. This was despite problems with the ignition lamp going out on the hot tube igniter, which was an early device that was fitted into the cylinder head of an internal combustion engine and used to ignite the compressed fuel-air mix by means of a flame. A hot tube igniter consisted of a metal or porcelain tube closed at one end and attached to the cylinder head on the other, and an adjustable burner that could be moved to position its flame at any point along the length of the tube. The engine was mounted on the right hand side of the rear wheel, with the crankshaft passing through the wheel and the flywheel on the left side, and the drive via an epicyclic gear in the hub. This 1899 race was later converted to electric ignition. According to Bert's account, Humber sold 15 to 20 of these motorcycles. From the description and timing, these would most likely be powered by Didion Boulton engines, as they started making their lightweight engine in 1896, initially with a hot tube ignition. And Humber collaborated with Harry Lawson of New Beeston Cycle Company, who held a license for the Didion Boulton engines. The next motorcycle used a Minerva engine, and they built about 50 motorcycles with the engine inclined beneath the down tube. Minerva sold kits to allow engines to be attached to pedal bicycles below the front down tube, making this form of motorcycle very easy to produce. By 1902, Humber had changed to a chain-driven motorcycle which Bert Yates rode in various events with considerable success. These 2 horsepower Humber motorcycles were built under license to Phelon and Moore, with a single cylinder P&M engine and 2-speed transmission. According to his account, Humber stopped making motorcycles in 1906 as expanding car production meant they ran out of space in their current factory. So in 1908, Humber moved into a new factory and motorcycle production resumed, but this time using a home-built engine. Launched their all-new 3.5 horsepower belt-driven motorcycle at the Stanley Show in 1908. This had an upright single-cylinder 487cc side valve engine with mechanically operated valves, a Bosch magneto ignition and an optional 2-speed hub, and in 1914 an optional water cooler. Humber offered ROC patent epicyclic gears up to 1910 and were reported to have been involved in the development of the wall auto wheel. At the 1910 Olympia show, Humber continued with the 3.5 horsepower model, but also added a 2 horsepower lightweight model. It was offered with an optional Armstrong 3-speed epicyclic gear and had variable belt pulleys as well. In the 1911 Olympia show, a further model had been added, a 2.75 horsepower 340cc 45-degree V-twin, the engine being identical to that of the Humber that competed and won the 1911 Junior TT. A 3-speed Armstrong epicyclic hub gear was optional, and the fact that the stroke was as short as the bore, a so-called square engine, when the norm was to have a longer stroke, was quite revolutionary. The same model range was exhibited at the 1912 show with only minor modifications. However, at the 1913 show, the 3.5 horsepower was offered in both water-cooled and air-cooled forms. The water-cooled version stated to be more suited for sidecar work. In 1913, Humber released details of a novel prototype motorcycle fitted with a unique engine in the form of an air-cooled inline 6 horsepower flat twin. But instead of a single rear cylinder, it had 2 smaller cylinders with a common combustion chamber. It didn't go into production and wasn't shown at the Olympia show that year, but at the 1914 show, Humber revealed that this prototype had evolved into a conventional 6 horsepower water-cooled opposed twin with the cylinders in line with the frame. The new machine came complete with a 3-speed gearbox and a fully enclosed rear chain drive. At the same time, they also offered a water-cooled version of their 3.5 horsepower single intended for sidecar work. Production of motorcycles ceased during World War I, and in the statement after the armistice, they stated that it is not expected that more than one motorcycle will be marketed when they are able to devote more time to civil business, which would most likely be the 3.5 horsepower air-cooled flat twin. They stuck to their promise, and the air-cooled 3.5 horsepower inline flat twin was the first motorcycle produced. And in the Olympia show in November 1919, they released the more powerful 4 horsepower or 600cc version. The flat twin was the sole model until 1923, and while principally aimed at the sidecar market, a sports version with aluminium pistons was marketed as a solo. However, in 1923 they launched a 350cc side valve single, and in 1927 the overhead valve and overhead camshaft versions of the same machine. The flat twin was withdrawn fairly soon after the 350cc single was introduced in 1923. Production continued until 1930, after which Humber focused on car production. Humber never made any bikes after that, and so the Humber mark disappeared into the history books where it still remains. There are enthusiasts out there, and many Humber motorbikes can still be seen at bike events. That's the end of this week's bike history. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week will be a local history to be disclosed next week. I will leave you with some more footage, so until next week, ride safe and take care.